Hello and welcome to today's episode, in which I attempt to make some tempting tacos out of tofu. When I did the complete protein trio a few months ago, as I was grating the tofu down for that, I thought that might be interesting to try as like a minced beef substitute, ground beef in the States. I then got a comment on a video asking if I'd ever made tacos. So I thought, oh, I'll combine those two ideas and then hopefully make something tasty. My original plan was to buy taco shells because then that's nice and easy. But then remembered that I'd bought a bag of maseca to make the pupusas, the little breakfast pupusas. This is masa harina. It's a type of Mexican corn flour. They treat the corn with lime, which is, I think it's like calcium something or other. And it gives it this very distinct flavor that if you've had a corn tortilla, that's the flavor there. I thought I'll make my own soft tacos and then I can use up this enormous bag. I'll make the dough first because that needs to rest for a few minutes. So I've got 2 cups, about 280 grams of the maseca. It's a very fine flour, a little bit grainy. I've measured out 2 cups of very hot water, which is about 480 ml. I'm going to do like 1.5 cups to start with, and then we'll see if it needs any more. I'm going to go in with my dough hook, bring everything together. A bit more. The amount of water is going to depend a little bit on the brand of flour, but also the humidity in where you are. So just add enough until it forms a consistent dough. And I'm going in with my hands and kind of squidging everything together. I think that's probably a good amount of water because it's forming a cohesive lump. Popped it in a different bowl and then I'm just covering it with a damp cloth just to keep it nice and moist in there. While the dough rests, I'm going to crack on with the tofu. So I'm just going to grate it down. I'm going to use the coarse side of a box grater. And then I'll add in some flavouring bits and pieces. I'm going to use some beef flavoured stock just to get that beefy kind of flavour. I've got this 100% cacao that I'm going to pop in. So it's like very, very dark chocolate. You can use any kind of dark chocolate, but I try and get one that's got a higher percentage of cacao because otherwise you're just going to end up with loads of sugar in there, which you don't really want per se. I cut the corner off the block of tofu and squeeze the liquid out. And I'm going to try and keep it in the plastic as I grate it just to help keep it together. And then just run it down the grater. So you can see it forms like little shreds. Any bits that are too fiddly to grate, I'll just break them down with my fingers. I'm going to do about a tablespoon of olive oil just to get a bit of richness in there, nice bit of colour. Fork that through to get everything kind of mixed and coated in oil. I use the Massel brand of meat flavoured stock powders, but any will work. I'll do like a tablespoon or so. Good grind of black pepper. Half a teaspoon of salt. I'll do a good grate of the cacao, maybe half a teaspoon or so. That's the block of it. Mix that together. And I've had my oven preheating at 180, which is about 350 Fahrenheit. I'm going to tip the mixture into a non-stick baking pan. And I'm going to spread this into an even layer. Now I'm not trying to dry this out or anything, but I just want to get some texture into it. So maybe half an hour, something like that. But I'm going to set my timer for 10 minutes and then I'll give it a stir, flatten it back down again. So I'll pop this in. I'm going to come back to my dough. Because I've not made it before, I'm not sure if it's bad to leave it standing for a while. Quick note for non-Spanish speakers, if you see a word, like a Spanish word that's double L, that's pronounced yo. So tortilla, calle, it's not la. They kept mispronouncing it on Great British Bake Off this year and it drove me crazy. The dough's looking perhaps a little bit crumbly. What I'm going to do is kind of flatten it on the counter and scatter a bit of water over the top and see if, yeah, just again, because I've not made them, I'm not sure if that's too dry. If I press this out, the edges just look a tiny bit ragged and I don't know if that's right. So I think I'll make it a little bit wetter. I'll sprinkle a little bit of water on, maybe 2 teaspoons to start, and then smush it back together. This dough isn't going to have the same elasticity as a wheat flour would because there's no gluten in corn, but I think it needs to be a little bit kind of pliable. Pop that back in the bowl for a minute because my tofu timer's gone off. It's getting a nice bit of colour on there. Yeah, I think maybe half an hour should do it. I'm just taking care to make sure nothing's sticking because that's when you're going to start getting burns. If you don't have a non-stick pan, just pop in a sheet of baking parchment, that kind of thing, even a silicone mat. I'm just going to flatten it between some silicone sheets. Yeah, I think that's going to work. I'm going to warm up a cast iron skillet. I think this is like a pancake pan maybe? I'm not sure. But this is what I'm going to use. If you haven't got one of those, just use a frying pan, something like that. I think this just needs to be dry, no oil or anything in the pan. And we're just going to toast them for about 30 seconds on each side. To squish them flat, I'm going to use another cast iron pan. If you think you might want to make tortilla a lot, you can buy presses that just does it all for you. I'm going to roll all of the mixture into little balls, and then everything's ready to kind of go. So I'm doing pieces about that kind of size. If I pop it on my tablespoon, you can see kind of how much is there. I'm warming that skillet over a high heat. I've made them too small. So I'm just going to make them bigger. Put the tofu on for another 10. I'm running out of space, so I can't really show you, but it looked just a bit darker than it did. And then after it's had the 10 minutes, I think I'll turn the oven off and then leave it in there. So I've got all my little dough balls there. I'm going to keep them covered while I work it. These marks on my sheet here are why you shouldn't preheat an air fryer with a silicone sheet in it. Yeah, because it flies straight up into the element. So I'll put that in the middle of the sheet, put another one on top and press it down a little bit, just so it's kind of flat. And then put my cast iron on and then just press it down. See what that's like. Yeah, I think that'll do. And then sliding it onto the pan, and I'll start working on another one. I'm going to try and flip this over. Oh, maybe the pan needs to be a bit hotter. Yeah, I might have to do this a few times. I don't think the pan's quite hot enough. In the meantime, here's the tofu. So it's all fairly even in colour. Yeah, perfect. Exactly how I wanted it. So I've turned the oven off, and I think I'm just going to tuck this back in there. And then these last little bits are a bit paler. They'll cook in the oven because there's still a bit of residual heat in there. So it's puffed up. Ah, I can't turn it. So I'm going to turn the heat back down again, and that's too hot. So yeah, so I think it just needs to be a little bit more even in colour, but the puffing is a sign it's ready. So I'll pop that on a plate and then cover it with a cloth. I'm going to keep frying all of these off. It'll take 20 minutes, half an hour, something like that. And then we'll pick it back up and we'll start making the other bits and pieces. All of my tortillas are fried, so I've got 18 of them all together. This was one of the first, and then this one's the last one. So it was a bit of trial and error, but I think I've kind of perfected a technique. I'm leaving those covered with a damp cloth just because then they soften up a little bit. And then to reheat them, I'll wrap a few in a damp paper towel, microwave it for like 45 seconds to a minute until everything's nice and warm again. We have a Shadow. Shadow! Hello, sweet boy. What I found worked for me quite well with the tortillas is put it into the pan, and then once you can move it without distorting the sides of it or it's sticking, about 15 seconds, flip it over, and then I used like a wooden spatula to press it down flat, left it for kind of 30 seconds or so. Once I started getting a bit of puffing in there, flipped it over, pressed it down again, and then just kept flipping it every 15 seconds, pressing it down. And that got a nice bit of colour on there. That seemed to cook it really nice and evenly without getting those burned patches on there. I kept the heat at 6, mine goes up to 9. So if yours goes up to 5, for example, do it on 3 and a bit, that kind of temperature. Just because otherwise you're gonna start burning it before the inside's cooked. Once it puffs, that's a sign you've got enough steam build up inside. I'm going to crack on with the sauce for the taco filling itself. So I'm going to put about a teaspoon or so of cumin seeds, and I'm just going to toast them off a little bit, just in a dry pan to boost the flavour up. This is a 400-gram tin of chopped tomatoes. I just blended it down quickly with the stick blender. It doesn't have to be super smooth, but you just want it fairly even. I had thought about doing like fresh onions and fresh garlic and stuff, but I've decided ultimately to keep it quite simple and quick, because then it will make a nice meal for after work, or if you get back from the pub instead of ringing the takeaway. Save yourself a bit of money and make something delicious at home. Once all of the sauce ingredients are in the pan, I'm going to let it simmer away just to develop the flavour a little bit, and then I'm going to make some pico de gallo. Pico de gallo, you might also see it as salsa fresca, so it's like a salsa made from tomato, onion and chili peppers. So it's just going to be a really nice fresh bit of zinginess to go with the taco. According to Wikipedia, pico de gallo means rooster's beak. That's the literal translation. There is another name for it which translates to flag salsa, because it sort of replicates the colours of the Mexican flag. Once you start smelling the cumin quite potently, it's time to start adding the other bits. I'm pouring the tomato. I'm going to put in about a half teaspoon of onion powder. Actually no, I'm going to do a teaspoon. This might not be traditional, but I'm doing it. Half teaspoon of garlic powder, half teaspoon of chili powder. For a bit of extra punch, I'm going to pop in a quarter teaspoon of cayenne pepper, and then I'll do about a teaspoon of oregano. These are all dried herbs. I'm not going to add any extra salt at this stage because the tofu is quite salty. I don't want to overwhelm it. Stir that in. It's going to pop in a little pinch of sugar. That just kind of enhances the flavour of the tomatoes. Totally optional though. And a little pinch of MSG just to boost the savouriness. I've got 2 little red onions that I'm going to use for the salsa. You can use whatever kind you like, not a problem at all. I'm going to do these on the mandolin just so it's nice and fine. I'm going to cut the pointy end off. And then I'm leaving this bit attached so then I've got something to hold on to. Okay, I'm just going to take off the outer couple layers of skin, quarter it, but leaving the bottom part attached. To take some of the sting, the kind of hot fieriness out of the onions, I'm blotting it on paper towel. And then spread it out on the towel. And then just blot it with another piece. You can also plunge them into cold water, but I just find it dilutes the flavour a bit too much. And then pop these into the bowl. I've taken out half of the onion because looking at it was an awful lot. I've got 550 grams of tomatoes. I've got a few of these bigger ones and then some cherry tomatoes. So the bigger ones I think I'll do, I'm doing roughly that kind of size. But you can go as big or as small as you want. And then the little cherry ones, yeah, about like that. I tend to use a serrated blade for tomatoes because I just find it cuts them a bit easier. I've got kind of a medium-sized red chilli. I'll have a taste and see how hot it is. They're not very hot, so I'm going to put 2 in. So break it down into quarters. I'm going to do seeds and everything, but you know, to take a bit of heat out, you can remove the seeds and the kind of white rib bits. Switch knives. And then just rock the knife back through it a couple of times just to get it down to little bits. So that's about what you want. I'm going to add in a good handful of fresh coriander. It's probably 20 grams or so. I'm just going to scrunch it up in a big handful. Stalks and everything. This is cilantro in the States. And then just chop that down. I'm also going to add parsley into mine, which isn't traditional, but I like parsley. So if you don't like coriander, just use all parsley, not a problem. Or you could add some mint in there if you want, and then just go back through it. Same again of parsley. I'm going to add the juice of a lime. Might need 2 because they're quite small, but we'll see. I'll give it a taste. So I'm just rolling it on the top to break it down a bit. Glug of olive oil. I'm not sure if olive oil is classically used, but I like a bit in there just for some kind of vibrancy and richness. Good grind of salt and pepper. And then this is where I discover I've used a way too small bowl. Give that a mix together. And I'll check the flavour and adjust as necessary. I'm going to put another lime in that. There's a lot of kind of punchy, fiery flavours going on. So I'm going to make like a kind of vegan take on sour cream. I'm just going to do plain yogurt and some cream cheese. You want a plain yogurt that's got no added sugar if you can find it, otherwise it's going to be really sweet. I've got 2 tablespoons of the cream cheese and 2 tablespoons of the yogurt, so I'll just mash that in with a fork. So that'll provide a nice bit of coolness against all those other kind of hot intense flavours. There's my tofu bits. So they've gone kind of crunchy, but I think once it's in with the tomato, it'll absorb a bit and they'll soften back down a bit. I'm just adding a squirt of tomato puree into the tomato mixture. This method of doing the tofu, I think that will be delicious on top of like a salad. It's got a very kind of meaty texture, just scattered on top of some green leaves, maybe some carrot strips, that kind of thing. Got a great easy dinner there. Mix that in. Gonna add a little splash of boiling water because the tofu will be absorbing it. And then I'm just gonna tuck a tortilla in the microwave, heat it up, and we'll do some eating. It is taco time. Yum, 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 yum. So there is my little tofu soft taco. To construct it, I did a dollop of cream cheese at the bottom, some pico de gallo, then the taco filling on top of that. On the top here, this is some vegan cheese that I made out of wheat starch and potato powder. I'll be publishing that video next week or the week after. It's honestly the best vegan cheese I've ever tasted. Tastes a bit like cross between a cheddar and a parmesan. There's none of that sweetness that a lot of vegan cheeses have got. This is going to be a messy one, so excuse me. That's just phenomenally good. I'm being a bit of an animal with it, but that's stunning. The texture is just amazing. Cooking the tofu like that just gives it a nice bite, like ground beef has. The tortilla is nice and soft, but it's got a bit of tension as you bite into it. The pico de gallo's got lots of lovely crunch in there. The flavors are really bright and vibrant. Lots of kind of different subtle flavors all combining together. That's just moved quite high up onto my list of things to make regularly. There's the vegan cheese. Yeah, it grates fantastically well. I'm doing it like cheese on toast. It goes a bit like cheddar, kind of cross between cheddar and halloumi, but without the squeakiness. Yeah, really good. The thing that took the longest was obviously the tortillas. So either get some taco shells, or if you can find soft tacos at the supermarket, that would work perfectly. And then you're at least halving your prep time. I had the tofu in for half an hour in total, then left it in the hot oven. You could put it at higher temperature, but you'll need to stir it a bit more often. So if you can, as long as you remember to pull it out every kind of 7-8 minutes, you could go 190, maybe even 200. You could even potentially fry the tofu off in the pan. It just might take a bit of time, and you'll need a big pan so you keep everything moving without flying out everywhere. All in all, that's just come out beyond my expectations. That's a scrumptious meal. Yes. If there's any tortillas remaining at the end of the filling, I might freeze some of them. So I think, maybe do it in batches with greaseproof paper between them, something like that. And then defrost them. Yeah, I think it's probably an idea to defrost them before trying to reheat them, because otherwise they might go very stodgy. Not sure. I'll update the pinned comment. Hit subscribe and tap the bell icon for further evidence that vegan food doesn't mean sticks and mud. And then head over to this one.